My dad told me that honest businessman is an oxymoron. There was a time when I realized the odds of creating a unicorn are extremely low. He said, Srikanth, I actually think your business is good. What I don't like you is you. I don't think you're capable of leading Fractal to the next level. Entrepreneurship is one of the most ego-crushing experiences that you can ever have. At Fractal, we say that client before Fractal, Fractal before team, and team before self. Hi, I'm Srikanth. I'm co-founder of Fractal, India's first AI company.
Srikanth, welcome to Qunba. Good morning. You took the entrepreneurial plunge right after graduating from IIM Ahmedabad. Can you walk us through that journey?
See, I grew up with this clarity that I'll never be an entrepreneur. In fact, during my MBA days, there was a course in entrepreneurship that I avoided because I knew that I was not going to be an entrepreneur. During that time, I met Narayana Murthy, the founder of Infosys, at a course called Business Ethics, run by a professor called Dr. Deepthi Bhatnagar. And in that course, he came and talked about how he's building Infosys to be powered by intellect and driven by values. When I grew up, I didn't want to be an entrepreneur because of two key reasons. One reason was that I didn't have the money, I didn't have the capital to start a business. And two, I felt that businessmen are corrupt. My dad told me that honest businessman is an oxymoron. So I grew up with that kind of a notion. So when I met Narayana Murthy, this notion broke. And I tested my second assumption during the dot-com days when people were raising capital easily. So once both the assumptions around entrepreneurship were gone, I thought I should be an entrepreneur. And that's when I decided on August 15, 1999, I told my friend that, hey, I'm going to quit by the turn of the millennium, I'm going to quit and start a business. I didn't know what I was going to start. And this came out of nowhere. It was my large language model providing a random answer. But then this answer became true and I started Fractal.
Did you go through self-doubt and what did you do?
There was a time when I realized that the risk-adjusted returns of entrepreneurship are lower than employment. So it's something that most people don't realize. Most people think that just because they look good, they could become Shah Rukh Khan. And so they take that bus from wherever and land at Mumbai and try to become the actor, the Bollywood actor. Entrepreneurship is very similar. The odds of success are low. The odds of creating a unicorn are extremely low. And the odds of actually beating your employment returns is low. So that is something that you realize somewhere during your entrepreneurial journey. And it tests you. At that time, you ask yourself the question, what am I doing this entrepreneurship for? And do you still believe in what you're doing? I think I asked those questions of myself and I knew that this was the place where I could learn and build a great business. So I continued building Fractal from there on.
What generally creates self-doubt for you?
Feedback. See, I'm very sensitive to feedback. So when I get feedback, I immediately start doubting myself and go into a shell and start thinking that, oh, this is weird, because feedback is always, it's usually a blind spot, something that you don't realize. I start processing feedback. It takes me a few days sometimes to take any piece of feedback and learn from it. But once I process that feedback, I have a plan of action. And that really makes me motivated to go and fix myself and get better, and in the process become a better leader.
Double click on that. What's the most brutal feedback that you ever received on your leadership? Who did it come from? What did they tell you?
You know, I've got more than my fair share of brutal feedback. So I'll give you two instances. Number one is when I looked for an executive coach, and I met this gentleman called Srikanth Velamakanni, who used to be the CEO of Marico in India. So he had just left Marico and he wanted to be a coach. So I met him and he was extremely insightful. So after spending some time with me, he said, let me go and spend some time in your offices, meet with the people, observe what's going on. I said, sure. So after a couple of days of doing that, he and I met again. And this time he told me something I wasn't expecting to hear. He said, Srikanth, you're one of the most client-unfriendly organizations I've ever met. When I see your organization, I see what conversations you have, your people have. They're always critical of your clients. You're very obsessed with the craft of AI and analytics. You're not interested in client success. And that's why you're not a client-friendly organization. Now, this was very hard-hitting. And after defending myself and Fractal for the next 20 minutes in that conversation, I went into a shell and started thinking about that. Next couple of days, I briefed my executive team and told them, this is what I heard from Srikanth Gupte. What do you think? Everybody said, no, I'm sure he's wrong. We all have this resistance to feedback. But then we spent more time in processing this, and then we learned from that. And from there onwards, we built a plan to be a more client-centric organization. And today, some 10 or 12 years later, actually 15 years later, no one is going to think that Fractal is a client-unfriendly organization, because we have changed. We have realized what it is to be a client-friendly organization, which means that do what's best for the client, even if it's not good for you, number one. Number two, do invent and invest on clients' behalf. So you listen to clients to solve their problems, but you think of what are the clients' problems that you can anticipate and solve for. So all our R&D spends are going in order to become more client-centric. So that's really one episode which I remember. The second one I'll tell you is when we were raising capital around 2010, 2011 timeframe. So we had an interesting venture capitalist who brought his US counterparts and spent time with me in our office and with our entire executive team. They spent a full day. Now this gentleman, let's call him Vineet, he was my senior from college. So I really believed in him. He was one of the very smart people. So after spending a whole day at Fractal, the end of the day, there was time for debrief. So there was a one-on-one debrief, and he said, Srikanth, we're not going to invest in your company. I said, sure. That's fine, because we had faced rejection a number of times. We are used to getting rejected by venture and venture capital. But then he gave me the reason. He said, Srikanth, I actually think your business is good. Your business can scale. What I don't like you is you. I don't think you're capable of leading Fractal to the next level. So that was very brutal feedback again. I tried to unpack it for the next many days as to what kind of a leader I need to become in order to be able to lead Fractal to the next level. I had the option to not talk about this and internalize it completely. But the very next day, I assembled my executive team and told them that, look, the business is all good. These people really like Fractal. What they don't like is me. And look, here's a plan where I will get better. I think these kinds of feedback sessions have really helped me. And over the years, I have built a practice of seeking feedback from everyone, including every Fractalite, and learn from it and try to get better as a leader.
What are the 2 to 3 key things in your leadership after that you pivoted in your leadership style?
Number one, I think, is my ego. I realized that crushing your ego is one of the most important ways an entrepreneur becomes more successful. Many people with big egos become entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurship is one of the most ego-crushing experiences that you can ever have. Number two, I have built some systems and processes that help me with my strengths and solve for my weaknesses. So one of my weaknesses is that I am very creative, I am very disorganized, and I can disrupt any conversation. So I may not listen, I may bring too many ideas and may confuse the people around me. So being able to stop and listen to others and use brainstorming sessions for brainstorming, but not make every session a brainstorming session, that's something I've learned as well.
How did you as a leader get people to rally around you to believe in a cause?
See, leadership is about followership. And people follow people. People don't follow ideas. So you have to be the exemplary leader who believes in a cause. And that really is how you get people to follow you. Once they know that they can trust you, then they start to trust your idea.
What are the 2 to 3 key attributes for a leader to have?
Number one is conviction. You have to have conviction in the idea, because every idea is a little baby at the time it is formed, and it takes a lot of conviction and development of the idea for it to take it to the next level. Number two is the ability to build a team that believes in your idea and works with you. And number three is you have to convince the whole world that this idea is great and something that they should rally behind and help you build that company.
What do you think is AI driving change in leaders and leadership?
The number one way in which AI is changing leadership is it is making leadership more data-driven and more scientific. It's almost as if you can run an experiment and learn from it. That scientific nature of decision-making is something that AI is bringing. Number two, it's making everything transparent and accountable. Number three, it's automating routine work. It's augmenting users, it's augmenting people. Therefore, you have more time to spend with each other. Humans eventually like to connect with each other, and AI is enabling humans to connect with each other.
What do you think are the 3 most important challenges that leaders need to solve for in the coming decade?
Number one, we have to invest in education. Number two, we have to build leaders and entrepreneurs who can take great ideas and bring them to life. And number three, India specifically needs a lot more infrastructure. So if you bring in great education, you create entrepreneurship, and then have a great infrastructure for them to build these businesses, I think India is going to be great for the next 50 years.
What will be the three most important challenges that leaders will have to solve for in their companies?
Number one is that being able to take a long-term view of business. You can't take a short-termish view of business anymore. The longer-term view, which is not just shareholder centricity, but stakeholder centricity. Earlier, it was all about the share price and just the shareholder. But now, your customers are important, your employees are important, and the world at large, the social construct in which you are operating is also important. So taking care of that in order to build the business, I think is going to become very important.
And what do you think the younger generation of founders today can learn from the earlier generation?
I think Indian entrepreneurs are showing extraordinary boldness. I'm super inspired by the new generation of entrepreneurs who are not working with the same kinds of assumptions that the previous generations worked with. I think that's a very good sign for India. I would also say that the latest generation of leaders have to go back to timeless principles of ethical leadership and also build more patience and resilience in the way they are building businesses. They can't just flake out every time they don't get a funding round and pivot to something else or build a new business or quit entrepreneurship altogether. That's something they can learn from the previous generation.
What's the best way to manage co-founders when you get elevated to CEO?
Number one, your co-founders will always be your equals, no matter what your title may be. So do not treat them any differently just because you have the title of the CEO. You have to, in fact, be even more nice to them once you have been elevated to the job of a CEO. Number two is that you have to find different roles where they are successful. Everyone is important. The more overlap and conflict there is within roles, the worse it is. So if you can find a way to provide clarity to each of the founders as to what they're doing differently from the others, it's very helpful. And number three, you have to meet very frequently and resolve any simmering tensions or anything that develops. So you have to have a way of bringing out issues and resolving them at a very frequent pace.
And what's your advice to the co-founders when the company is transitioning to a professional setup where there's a CEO?
My advice to any entrepreneur who is transitioning from a CEO to a non-CEO role is to find out where their passion lies, where their strengths lie, and focus on that. Right? You have made the decision to find a CEO, and therefore now you are playing the role of helping the CEO become more successful. You do not have to compete with them. You have to help them, and yet you have to play your special role. So what are those unique skills that you bring to the table that you can continue to build on while letting the CEO run the shop?
What's the most common piece of career advice that you've heard people give, but you think today is obsolete and you completely disagree with?
So one of the most misconceptions about careers is that there is a best job out there, one that pays the most, and what the campus people feel is the sexiest job right now. Everyone's unique job is a function of where they can get the most learning. My advice to every person who's starting their career is to maximize learning first before they maximize their earning. And that's the one thing that most kids and most early professionals don't realize.
Why do you feel people leave jobs and careers, and what do you think leaders can do to ensure people don't leave because of bad management?
People leave managers, people leave toxic environments, and people leave because they feel like they're not growing enough. So if you can create an environment where there's transparency, where there's frequent feedback, and where people feel like they're getting better every day, I think you'll retain people a lot more.
One very common predisposition of leaders in interviews is to look for a connection with their minus ones. But how do you square that up with not just creating mini-me versions of yourself?
It's problematic to believe that you should find people like you. I believe that there should be a strong process. The process is, A, many people should interview the person, number one. Number two, they should provide their feedback objectively without knowing the other people's feedback. And number three, dimensionalize what you're hiring for. Not just, I want the best person for this job, but the best person for this job needs to have these 3 or 4 characteristics and have them rate them. Now, once you do that and bring all of them together at the end for a debrief, That's when you can bring in your conviction, your faith. Eventually, you want to take a leap of faith in hiring somebody, but you have to run a process, a scientific process before you get to that place.
As a leader, do you encourage when people come in with their papers? Do you encourage retaining them and matching their compensation?
Most frequently, people don't give you genuine reasons for why they're leaving. They'll give you reasons that you cannot contest with rather than the real reasons they're leaving. If you can somehow build that relationship to understand and unpack what's going on in their world and solve for that, it could be something to do with growth. It could be something to do with new challenges. It could be something to do with some colleagues that they're not getting along with. If you understand what is really going on, you can retain them and actually help them build their career at your organization. Of course, you may have to match their compensation because now you've already passed that point where they made the decision. But if they've already made the decision, I would rather let them go.
What do you think today's CEO is being measured on success parameters versus, let's say, a decade ago?
Earlier, CEOs were measured only on shareholder value creation. That was the mantra. I think now there is greater realization that it is stakeholder-centric. So your stakeholders like your customers, your employees, the world at large are important as well. So yes, maximize the share price, but make sure that you take care of all the stakeholders. And if you take care of those stakeholders, in the long term, your share price will take care of itself. Like they say, share price is like a voting machine in the short term and a weighing machine in the long term. So if you do the right things, you'll get the right stock price as well.
What do you feel is your proudest moment when your leadership really made a difference to a crisis?
When COVID hit, the whole world looked unclear, uncertain. We didn't know what was going to happen. And we had the opportunity to be just like any other company, let's say fire people, cut expenses, etc. We had to cut expenses for sure, but we realized that people who might be even fired for performance reasons, end of year was anyway there. So we could have fired people for performance reasons. We said that, look, nobody should be fired at this point of time because even the non-performing ones need to look for a job if they are fired. And COVID time with all the various kinds of lockdowns that are happening was not a conducive time for anyone to look for employment. Therefore, we said that no matter what happens, we're not going to fire a single person. And we announced this right away. We variabilized some of our pay structures. We said if we meet our revenue targets, everyone is going to get paid the same amount of money. But if we do not meet our revenue targets, here's a plan by which we still remain solvent. That was something I was very proud of. One more thing that we did at that time was with our cafeteria and cafeteria staff. The caterer that we had, who used to supply all our meals, they were very much dependent on Fractal for their revenue stream. So we realized that they will not be able to keep their employees working because they will have lost all their revenues. So we reached out to them and told them that from today, till the time the lockdowns get over and everybody's back in office, we're going to pay the salaries for your entire staff. By that, you don't have to fire any of them. So that's something that I'm very proud of. It's a small amount of money in the scheme of things, but to think of not just your own team, but to think of an extended team and taking care of them during COVID was, I think, something that I'm really proud of.
How do you balance being compassionate as a leader and yet having to push hard for results?
I think compassion as a leader is very important. So you have to listen, you have to create an environment of trust and transparency, and you have to give feedback. You may be compassionate, but that doesn't mean that you don't provide feedback. You have to, when you're providing feedback, you have to provide feedback in a constructive way, letting them know that you really care about them. Once they know that you care about them, they listen to what your message is. And that is the way in which you bring compassion and yet focus people on results. Focus on people and focus on results are not necessarily at odds with each other. You can be both focused on people and focus on results.
Two things that you relate to or are most proud of the culture at Fractal, and two things that you think you can infuse more of into the Fractal culture.
What I'm most proud of Fractal is our belief in client centricity and doing what's best for the client. At Fractal, we say that client before Fractal, Fractal before team, and team before self. It's very clear that you can do what's best for the client even if it's not good for Fractal. Number two is this orientation towards learning. Everyone in Fractal knows that the half-life of knowledge is 3 years and it's decreasing. So everyone in Fractal is thinking of how do I get better every day. We are not static, we are very dynamic as a company. Everyone brings a growth mindset and is always learning how to become better. What I would like to bring new to Fractal or get better at Fractal is this ability to build for the very, very long term. I would like everyone in Fractal, all the 5,000 people in Fractal, to focus on the long term, apart from focusing on the immediate priorities of solving client problems. Secondly, I'd like to become bolder as a company. The world of AI is changing, and we have to be extremely bold in order to shape the future of the world with AI.
How are you fostering leadership skills among your team to develop the next generation of leaders?
First of all, we have a program in Fractal called Ideas to Business. Idea of this program is to find entrepreneurs and let them work with ideas. So we have many startups that have come out of Fractal over the last many years because of this program. One example is 𝐂𝐼, which is doing game-changing work in the healthcare space. This was an idea that was born in our conference room. We hired Prashant, and then he developed this idea of 𝐂𝐼, built a team, and now it's raised a lot of capital. It has influenced 10 million lives in the world around tuberculosis, lung cancer, and COVID, etc. Number two is investment in R&D. Fractal spends about 10% of its revenue on R&D. This is unheard of in the context of an Indian company, in the context of the sector that we operate in. Most companies spend 2 to 3% of revenues on R&D. India as a whole spends only 0.7% of its GDP on R&D. That means that we are experimenting with new ideas. There's a lot of license to experiment and fail within Fractal. And I think leaders are created when they can experiment with ideas, fail, and then learn from those ideas. So creating a culture where failure is accepted and in fact encouraged, and then you protect the people. The ideas might fail, but the people have learned in the process, and give them new places to go and run with those ideas. That, I think, is the way in which we're building leaders at Fractal.
If you could ask someone one question in an interview, and based on only that one question you would hire him or her, what would you probe them on and why?
My favorite question in an interview is to ask them to describe the story of their life. Their narrative of how they have lived their life and how they have found success, how they've gotten to this part of their life and success so far, and how they're going to the next level is really very interesting.
3 simple words that describe Srikanth the leader.
Authentic, empathetic, visionary.
Who influenced your early thought process on leadership, and what is that one lesson that you think has stayed with you that you've practiced as you've gone through these 2 decades of entrepreneurship?
The person I admired the most during my early phase of career was Jeff Bezos. I really admired the way he built Amazon and bet on the long term. I saw an interview of Jeff Bezos in 2009 by Charlie Rose, where he mentioned that customer centricity and long-term thinking are the 2 defining differentiators for Amazon vis-a-vis all other retailers out there. And I found that fascinating, and I've tried to imbibe those lessons into how Fractal is built.
Who's been your biggest support during hard times, Srikanth, and what do you rely on them for?
The biggest support for me has been my wife. She has been a partner in the journey of building Fractal. Most often people feel like entrepreneurs have done it themselves. What they don't realize is the supporting mechanism is super crucial for their success. So very early on, I met my wife 1 year after I started Fractal. And literally in the first few months, she started selling the idea of Fractal to the world at large. She's been with me in business development meetings all around the world. And she has been a pillar of strength, especially during the tough times, and also showing conviction in my ability to build Fractal and take it to the next level.
2 mistakes from your own career that you'll tell your kids to avoid at all costs.
Number 1 is do not quit your first job too early. People join a first job and they find that it's so far away from their expectation. That's because all jobs are different from what you expect when you're on campus. I would say spend some time and learn before you can leave the first job. Number 2 is maximize learning over earning. Do not succumb to pressures, peer pressure about what is a good job. Make your own decision, and it has to be a function of pleasure, meaning, and strength.
Did failure teach you anything more about human beings and people?
See, my idea about failure is that failure is essential to success, because you are learning only when something has failed, and everything is working. There is no feedback. In fact, everything I've learned in my life is because I've failed so often and have taken the time to process the failure and then improve my decision making in that light.
Who in business India is inspiring you right now?
I'm very fascinated by how people change their identity as a leader over time. As they grow, they become something else. For example, Bill Gates was a programmer, a tech geek, a founder of a startup, then a business leader of a company called Microsoft, then a philanthropist today. He's done multiple career changes. So I would look at Nandan Nilekani because he's done a similar career change as an entrepreneur, founder of Infosys, the best salesperson at Infosys, to now a statesman who's building Aadhaar and other things for India. So I'd love to learn from him as to how he has made those career pivots and hopefully accomplish the same.
If you were in my seat and had an option to put somebody there, who are you itching to meet and what do you really want to ask them?
I would go and find some of the spiritual leaders. Let's say Vivekananda. He was 33 when he died, but he could unite or bring a unifying idea across world religions as early as 1895. I would love to get someone like him and ask him, how does he influence people? How does he build an idea? And how does he lead without authority and create such a movement that people remember him 150 years later?
What's the end goal and the chase for Srikanth that brings him to work every day?
My quest is for building an institution that can stand the test of time. Every day I think of how can Fractal be relevant, not just today, but 10, 20, 30, maybe even 50 years from now. Building this company for the very long term, for the next 100 years, is what consumes me every day.
I've got a final rapid fire question for you. Question 1, the hardest thing about being a founder is dash.
Relentless optimism.
One thing you've learned never to do as a leader.
Treat people badly.
One thing you've learned always to do as a leader or CEO.
Listen to feedback.
One personality trait of yours that gets in the way the most.
My ego.
A business buzzword you dislike hearing in meetings.
Paradigm.
One thing in your job you think you could get better at.
Listening actively.
70-hour work week dash.
Is not for everyone.
When in doubt, Srikanth dash.
Talks to people.
One educator or business leader you wish you had as your coach.
I already have Marshall Goldsmith.
Data or instinct, what do you bet on more?
Data plus instinct.
First thing you do in the morning, last thing you do at night.
Read books.
Morning person or night owl?
Night owl transforming to a morning person lately.
A cheesy song you often hum in the car.
Kishore Kumar songs, हमें तुमसे प्यार कितना और मेरे महबूब क़यामत होगी.
Your favorite celebrity you follow on social media.
Jeff Bezos.
One thing you wish people knew more about you.
That I read 100 plus books every year.
What are you most grateful for in your life?
People who have believed in me.
3 upcoming Indian startups on Srikanth's founders list to watch out for.
Sarvam.ai, Flyfish.ai, and Cure.ai.
A Chicago Bulls match with Sam Altman or catching up with black coffee with the founders of Fractal.
Sam Altman.
One tech breakthrough you'd love to see in your lifetime.
Babelfish. Essentially, it's a little thing that you put in your ear, which automatically translates every language in the world. Conceived by Douglas Adams in A Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy.
If you had a gigantic billboard out there and could put out a message to millions, Srikanth, what would it be and why?
Believe in yourself.
Srikanth's legacy will be
the most defining AI company for India.
With that, thanks for doing this, Srikanth. Absolutely brilliant.
Qunba is a super inspiring platform for youngsters to learn from inspiring entrepreneurs and business leaders of India today.
It's going very well, Srikanth. Absolutely crisp, candid, and very, very straight.